If you were to put yourself in this now Democratic Party shoes where they're so tunnel visioned in on Donald Trump, why do they fear Trump so much? What is, because everyone's saying that each side is going to ruin democracy, but it seems
Yeah,
like they're so focused on
exactly.
beating each other as opposed to what you've said in one of your things after Kamala Harris was announced as the next running president for the Democratic Party. You said that everyone's so focused on fighting each other and not focused on the American people. But where did this massive separation take place? Was it 2016 or was it happening much before then?
I it's all kind of driven by a tribalistic impulse, and I think that it really that the year it's been happening since the 1980s, but the big change here I think was 2010, and that was the year that the Supreme Court issued a decision called Citizens United, and the Citizens United we almost lost enough democracy in the 1880s and 1890s. There was, the country was really taken over after the Civil War by these giant robber barons. There'd never been concentrations of wealth like that in America. And you had these these very, very powerful families like John D. Rockefeller, who is as rich now as Elon Musk. I mean, as rich then as Elon Musk is now.
Mm-hmm.
He controlled, I think, about 70 or 80% of the oil production in the world, one man. You had the Morgans, the Carnegies, Andrew Carnegie. You had the Fricks and the Whitneys, these very, very powerful robber barons who sat on interlocking boards of the Sugar Trust, the Oil Trust, the Rail Trust, and they were really running our country. And at that time, there was no direct election of senators, so the public did not vote for the senators. The Senate was chosen by the legislatures. The legislatures were easy to buy. For a couple of $100, you could buy a state legislature. And it was said of the Pennsylvania state legislature at that time that they were the only legislature that was not for sale because John D. Rockefeller owned every one of them and he wasn't selling any of them. So that is, and then because they controlled the Senate, they controlled the political parties and they controlled who was going to become president. And there were no labor laws at that time. There were no labor unions. There was child labor. There were no child labor laws. There were no, women couldn't vote. Of course, blacks couldn't vote. And it really was not, it was no longer a democracy. And then you had a confluence of events occur where you had an agrarian movement called populism that was democratic, where farmers were rising up, and you had in the cities a group called the progressive movement, which was sort of liberal Republicans who were good government types, and they joined with the farmers, and they ended up electing Teddy Roosevelt, who was part of the oligarchy, but he was also idealistic and was willing to stand up, and he had the confidence to stand up to wealth. He wasn't scared or intimidated by it. And he became president. They passed the Sherman Antitrust Act, and they broke up the Standard Oil Company. They broke up all of these trusts. They passed child labor laws. They passed a 40-hour work week. They gave women the vote. They passed an income tax for the first time. At that time, if John D. Rockefeller paid the same tax as the poorest street sweeper. So they made wealthy people for the first time pay their share. They passed a corporate income tax. And the most important thing they did to restore democracy was in 2008, they passed a law making it illegal for corporations to donate to federal political candidates. That law helped restore American democracy. And, we became the exemplary democracy in the world, and everybody began imitating us. When we had the American Revolution in 1784, we were the only democracy in the world. By 1860, the beginning of the Civil War, there were 5, all of them modeled on us. By the time my uncle was president in 1960, there were 150 democracies, and pretty soon there would be 190, all modeled on the U.S. experiment. So we lived up to our promise to being the exemplary nation, and it was because we passed all these laws that righted democracy. The most important was that law that said corporations can't donate to a federal political candidate. In 2010, the Supreme Court issued a decision saying that any restrictions on companies giving to political candidates is a violation of free speech, that donation is actually speech, and that it's protected by the First Amendment, and any restrictions are illegal. That released a tsunami of corporate money into the political process. And so this election is going to cost, prior to 2010, a presidential election would cost maybe $1 billion all in. This one's going to cost $15 billion. And that money is all coming from billionaires and from, if you want to run for senator of New York, you got to get $300 million. That means you're on the phone all day with millionaires and billionaires, and you do not have time to talk to ordinary people. So both political parties became possessed by very wealth, great wealth, and by corporate control. And the only way they distinguish themselves is by pointing to the other one and saying, "You're evil. You're going to be the end of the republic." Mm-hmm. And so I think that's when the stakes really heated up, and people just became very, very tribalistic. I'm in this party. I'm not going to listen to anybody else. I'm not anything that's critical of my party. I'm going to ignore it. Anything that's, critical about the other guy, I'm going to believe it. And we're all in a position now where we're being told that if you vote for that guy, it's the end of the world. Mm-hmm. And it's not healthy for our country. And it's not true either.
Yeah.
We have some institutions in this country that are strong at present. Even if, like on January 6th, there were a bunch of people who went into the Capitol, but the U.S. military was not supporting them. This was not a coup d'etat against our country. It was not, in the sense that it really was a threat, an existential threat to American democracy. There were a lot of people with bad intention. There were a lot of people who committed crimes. They deserved to be in jail. But in terms of threatening the United States system of government, it's not true. That's not what it was. It was not good. It was bad. But it's been inflated to make it seem like it was that America, the American experiment with self-governance was hanging by a thread, and that just wasn't,
Yeah.